Hello, I am Cody Ellingham, and this is the Transformation of Value podcast. Today I talk with Bitkiwi Paul, fellow Bitcoiner, philosopher, confidant, and of course part of Bitkiwi, organising New Zealand's premier Bitcoin Meetups. This episode roams across a wide range of topics from politics and nostalgia for the old days to the importance and value of real-life Bitcoin meetups. The next Bitkiwi meetup is July 22nd here in Wellington, so check the show notes for details and I hope to see you there. If you want to get in touch with me, please send an email to hello@thetransformationofvalue.com and I will get back to you. I do hope you enjoy this episode. If you would like to support the show, please consider streaming some Satoshis via your favorite podcasting 2.0 platform such as Fountain or Breeze. Otherwise, onto the show. And on the Bitkiwi front, I mean, I wanted to catch up with you a little bit about that because we're coming out, 7-8 months since Bitkiwi 1. When was the first one again? Was it November last year?
September,
sorry.
yeah.
So it'll be coming out almost a year in a little bit, and then we'll be...
Yeah, that's pretty cool. 5 events down now, 6 coming up a month from today.
Yeah.
Pretty excited, actually.
Yeah, I was reflecting on it myself as well. I caught up with a few other guys today and here in town, and just looking at how much things have grown, how much the community has matured as well. I think there's some really solid connections, some really solid projects emerging, and really the power of those in-person meetups has come through. So we've got July 22nd. You've got the next Wellington meetup. Is there anything special planned for that? Like, how's that tracking?
Yeah, planning's going good. Nothing special, sticking to our usual principles, incremental improvement. So we've got a couple of little improvements we're working on, just to add something new. But just minor things, proof of work. Don't go too fast, too hard. It'll all come crashing down. Just picked out the bits where we thought we could do better, and make it more enjoyable, bring people in. So yeah, we've got a couple of little things we're working on having ready. But no, I'm pretty excited. I've seen a few people talking about having booked flights and stuff like that. I think it's sort of it's quite well known now, and people want to make the pilgrimage to get together with all the Bitcoiners. So it's really exciting. It's awesome. It's awesome. I'm absolutely loving it now. Yeah, get really excited about them. Used to get a bit nervous, but now just really look forward to it and catching up with all the Bitcoiners. And yeah, like you say, is the community has matured. There's a noticeable difference, and yeah, heaps of cool projects coming out and heaps of collaborations. And I'm not going to take the credit and say that everybody met at Bitkiwi, but you definitely see some relationships that were built there, and so it's pretty cool and pretty proud of that.
Yeah, it's a really solid way to build grassroots organizations is through these in-person meetups, and it's almost the opposite of what people try to astroturf that approach with other things, but it doesn't really work out. And I was talking to someone else who's a Bitcoiner in his heart, but he happens to be somewhat involved in other things, and just the difference in attitude that you see between the Bitcoin world and everything else. It really stands out, and I've really noticed that myself as well. Like you talk to someone and that if they get it, they get it, and if they don't, they don't. And it's like, I mean, it's a classic thing, but
that's a cool thing, when you meet Bitcoiners, when you meet a Bitcoiner that's like been educating themselves in that, you just know without having talked about it that there's this little level of common ground that you could talk about certain things and they're just going to understand it and get where you're coming from. And we talked about a while back about, a Bitcoin principle of don't trust, verify. And so, got hold on that sort of thing. But then I was saying the great irony is that because you are talking to a Bitcoiner that has put themselves through this sort of education and still going through it, there's a level of trust. And it's kind of a great irony. You think, I can kind of trust this person, even though it's a principle that I shouldn't need to. Yeah. But actually you trust them more because of it. And I love that little irony of it.
Well, I went out to lunch today with a friend, and we were talking philosophy and just sort of where things are at. And I sort of made the comment like, I think we're life, our quality of life is pretty high at this point in time. But there's this greater kind of existential challenge that I think a lot of people are going through around, the search for meaning, this sort of the decay of the world, this kind of perceived decay. And even though our standard of living is higher than it has been historically, there's this kind of quite nihilistic sort of doomerism towards what the
Mm,
future may be. And I was sort of saying and trying to explain, like, because of the long time preference of Bitcoin, sorry, the low time preference of Bitcoin, it sort of flips your perceptions of everything. And it's like, well, if you're talking about Bitcoin, you're learning about it today, you're so early that, you know, wealth, money, whatever that stuff is, it's kind of irrelevant. Like if you make it to the top of the S curve, as Marty Bent says, you got to take it with you. But it's like you just have to get to that point in time, and so there's a reason to want to see that future unfold
mm,
and get to it. And the opposite of like just sort of you know zoning out and not doing anything, not working towards that is really common and quite prevalent right now. And you see it sort of the way people plan their lives. It's very contagious. I think this kind of negativity, but at the same time, the kind of the optimism can be contagious as well. And there's sort of this balance between those two forces. I think.
yeah, well, I think it's a innate, it's our nature within us that humans, like all other life, had a struggle, and you had these challenges to stay alive and prosper. And then with the way we've advanced as a society and a lot of things got a lot easier, the struggle has disappeared in most instances, especially when you live somewhere like we do. And so people have just got that missing hole. And, it seems like a logical thing that if you don't have a struggle, you should be happier. But because it's just, and it's ingrained in us over hundreds of thousands of years, you can't just take that away and expect that the human being has changed and doesn't need that. And it's not part of the psyche anymore, because it's there. And if you don't have a struggle, then you're going to lose happiness and motivation, and you just sort of just carrying on. And so you kind of have to, now we've got this challenge that you have to introduce your own struggle. Like you have to make yourself struggle. You have to strive and keep pushing and pushing. And that's actually the key to being happier overall, I feel. And most people don't, there's a huge piece of logic missing, where people are like, I just want to be happy. And it's like, well, actually, you can't, nobody is happy all the time. There are always going to be times that you're unhappy, and that's part of life. And you're not actually going to have a general better level of happiness trying to behave this way. You need a struggle, and then your happiness will come from how you react to the unhappy situations. All of a sudden, you'll find yourself resilient, and they don't affect you as much, and your whole demeanor is happier overall. You need a struggle, and if you haven't got one, make one. Something worth struggling for.
Yeah, it's a very stoic way to look at it. That sort of fulfillment, contentment that you get when you achieve something, and it's not instantaneous, and you can't just flick it on. There's work that goes into that to achieve that, to climb that mountain. But I think I have been thinking a lot lately about, I guess, we're coming up to an election and there's a few things happening, and I realize just how disconnected I am from that mechanism, that sort of entertainment industry of the political theatre. And I was saying to my friend today as well, I was like, I don't feel like I'm a political entity. But he was like, well, absolutely you are, but it's just not at this low level, this kind of pop political thing. I'm actually really interested in the more the higher level questions, questioning the way things work, the way the systems are, and kind of engaging in discourse, which is actually a real, actual political engagement and participation. But just ticking the box is not, the two ticks for your party is, and your MP is not really participating. It's sort of a token gesture, and just reflecting on what that means as, I'm effectively zoned out of the media right now, so I don't even know really what's going on except from what people tell me. Um, but it's have you noticed that change in yourself?
100%. This is probably I've felt least engaged in election in my life. Um, and I've become a single issue voter, and there's nobody to vote for
Yeah,
on my single issue. So it's kind of disheartening.
yeah,
Uh, and what do? Do you try and enter that realm yourself and become that entity that people could vote for? But I mean, that's a life devotion. And actually, I feel like there's more important things I want to devote myself to in Bitcoin to do something like that at the moment. Um, but yeah, 100% agree with that sentiment. I've definitely become disengaged from that. I was always quite interested in politics. I always used to think carefully about my vote, and looking at what's going on. I have always been a bit of a prescriber to the theory that, politics is a pull and a sort of two sides pulling on each other, and you need to end up somewhere in the middle. So I've never been a left or right leaning voter, um, like for a long time. And, I felt things are going too far right, it's time to vote left. Things are going too far left, it's time to vote right. I mean, I didn't necessarily have that exact thought process, but when I look back on my vote selections, that is how it's kind of gone. And so, yeah, I was always quite engaged in that, listened, paid attention, thought carefully about how those things are tracking. But yeah, Bitcoin really does open your eyes to something bigger than that system a little bit. Not a, not, I'm definitely more quite moderate. I'm not a anarchist, tear it all down type of thing. Like I feel like it's a natural progression of human history, but I feel like technology is superseding that kind of organization of money, because
yeah,
really, when it boils down to it, that kind of is what it is. Um, and so now I feel like the money, we have better technology for the transmission storage of value. And so actually the political system is going to have to catch up with that, and it will take a smaller role in future than it has in the past, because they won't pull the levers of that money anymore. They'll just use it like the rest of us.
I wonder if there's a connection between the development of new technologies and revolution in political social structure. Like, I mean, the parliamentary system, that must be 17th century enlightenment. Like, at what point did we move from kings and feudal lords as the, direct arbiters to some sort of parliamentary system, even if it was just chosen through the gentry or whatnot? Like, I wonder if there's a connection there that we can explore. I wonder if there's the same thing happening now, where the complexity of a digital world is just too much for, ministers. No matter how many advisors they've got, they just can't process that amount of information, and so they're
Mm.
basically just reading off of these crib sheets that they get before a meeting to just make a decision on something that they don't really understand, and even their advisors don't understand. And so they're just kind of winging it, and they put the suit on and they do the press release and the press conference, but it's not really any substance. Like, I
Yeah, I
don't know.
definitely feel like there's a lot of wasted effort there, eh? Because the percentage of time in politics that must be spent simply on messaging, essentially just PR all the time. Like, how productive can they possibly be? They can work around the clock and put their life, if like put massive effort into it, and just I'm sure a lot of them feel like they're doing a great thing and they really believe in this. But the fact is, a huge portion of that effort is directed to things that are really inconsequential to what they're doing, and they're just about getting the right message across and staying in the position that they're in and maintaining that role. And
Mhm.
so where's the and I mean, I get it. I can see how it's come to that, and that's what the political game is now. It's just vitally important of how they're presented and how they're perceived, but it's come at the expense of actual good work. And there's very little in that realm where they're making a decision that is difficult and won't be necessarily well received, but they are sure that it's the right one, so they go through with that. I just don't see that happening.
Yeah. I wonder, like, if it's really become so mediated through press releases, image management, social media. It feels like there's almost nothing else to it, and that half of the teams, if not, most of the teams and the staffers are really just about that image management, and it's like celebrity, kind of the spectacle of politics,
Oh,
and
that's definitely what it is. I mean, I don't, although, I've always been fairly politically engaged, I tend to avoid it now, and I don't try and talk much politics and get all polarizing that and push across my strong opinions. But that is definitely a thing. And I mean, there is even a quote, and I saw it again just the other day. And Jacinda Ardern literally said, "Politics is a feeling." That is that is a quote, and I can sort of see where she's coming from, and that kind of sums it up. Like, and that really comes back to just what you're describing. Like, politics is a feeling, so her success in politics is driven by how she can make people feel.
X
Not,
Factor, the Chanel
yeah,
number 5 kind of, it doesn't really matter what the policy is. And even the nature of language itself becomes, you know, tenuous. The words you
mm,
use to describe things. And we're going through that right now, this kind of reworking of the English language, the deployment of language as a weapon. And it's really interesting how, you know, it's literally out of 1984, in news speak. But
mm,
just, I mean, and it's been ramping up. I remember growing up, you sort of saw this emergence of PC and that sort of thing. And now it's a coded language. It's like, the Latin of the Vatican, it's this thing that you use within this
mm,
sphere, and it doesn't actually mean anything outside of that group. The words
mm.
themselves are meaningless. And if you do like a systematic analysis, that there's nothing, there's no maths, there's no substance to it. And yeah, that celebrity, that kind of mediation of the political, of course they're going to select for that. They self-select, and you're not going to make it if you're a genuine, you know, you know, head down, get stuff done kind of person. You do need to be a sophist and
Mm.
talk. And I mean, maybe that's not a new thing. I mean, that was since the old days. That was the challenge. The one who could speak the most and the most
Yeah, and
eloquently.
it seems a bit like when I first started noticing some of the things in the speech and that, it was quite an eye opener. And then when I'd mention it to people, I realized everybody else sees it too. It's like everybody knows this, and yet we just carry on. Just yeah, that's just part of the game. If you hear a particular word or term from a politician more than once in a short period of time, then you
They're
know.
programming you.
Yeah, you know that they've sat around a table and they've come up with that term, and now it's the strategy. We've got to give it this word, we've got to label it this way, and we've got to press that home, and that just goes back to what I was saying. All this time spent strategizing around these things, and I get it. I know it's important, and it is if they want to be elected or re-elected, but it's sad. It's like, man, I wish instead of these high-powered, intelligent people who really want to make a difference, quote unquote, like I wonder if they ever reflect on how many hours did I spend today talking about what words we're going to use and how we're going to say something, and again, it's logical, makes sense, but man, all that time, all that effort just around these things which don't actually have a consequence other than getting somebody re-elected or changing how someone feels, so you can, there's not a tangible actual difference in what the policy is or what they're talking about. It's just the way that it's talked about.
Yeah. I noticed something interesting today though, like talking about the Reserve Bank of New Zealand. Their website is rbnz.govt.nz. And even
Yeah.
that little govt bit, government, something really interesting there, because like we have these different words that are very similar but very clearly different in what they mean exactly. And the word government, the word state, the word nation, the word the crown, there's all of these kinds of things, the authority that they refer to. I mean, the Reserve Bank is not the government.
I was
Yet
just going to say, aren't they supposed to be considered an independent entity?
yeah, and
I'm surprised they get that in their email
it,
address.
but it's wholly owned by the New Zealand government, but it has statutory independence. But by having this email address, this website associated with it, it's like I don't know, the words start losing their meaning and their definition, and I don't know, like it seems like it's not much of anything, but effectively you've got one that they are, and they're across the road from each other. That they're the same thing,
Mm.
and so there isn't that independence, that room to actually set their own course, and so effectively they are a vehicle of the government of the day,
Mm.
and we see what that means is we're living through that right now with our inflation. I'm looking forward. Well, I think when's our next inflation results going to come out? I think it's July 9th or something. So um, it's I don't know. There's just things like that which I sometimes notice, and
Mm.
I think, yeah, there's been this blurring, this lack of distinction around these kinds of things, and they become accepted dogmatically. It's just accepted truth that that's what it is. But then, you no longer have as many people asking the question about what that actually is. From what authority is this even here? It just is, and it's I think it's difficult to walk stuff like that back.
Mm.
Same with
Well,
laws.
yeah,
Yeah.
like so many things, the Reserve Bank was started with, always a good intention, good reasoning, and then it just morphs over time. Um, and then, I mean, that isn't necessarily a good example of it, but there is that famous saying, I can't remember who said that there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government policy.
Yeah.
Um, I can't remember the exact words or who said that, but that did crack me up because and it's always an eye opener when you come across something that is just an entrenched way of life and has been for a long time, and you discover that it was actually set up as a temporary measure for something a long, long time ago, that then the authorities couldn't shake because there was too much pain to try and get rid of that.
I,
It would cost them too much political capital.
I think that the other thing I've been reflecting on lately is, and in our daily lives as proletarians, I mean, as normal people, basically, we do our thing, go to work or, do work. But I don't think we're fully aware of the layers of motion, the kind of the layers of sediment and change that happen at higher levels in particular, that tend to wash down and kind of flow down to our level. And even though we're all on the surface of the earth, it's also like I have had opportunities just in my travels to meet people who are in that sort of higher echelon, and you bump into them every now and then. And even in New Zealand, it's not that far removed to meet people who are, at that level. And you realize the world they inhabit is actually quite different to the world we inhabit, and the way they see things and the way they respond to things. And so even the idea that it's like, yeah, we'll slip a law and, we'll make the announcement on a Friday afternoon, that there's some planning and strategy that goes into that, with knowing that they're pulling the wool over somebody's eyes, generally the public, and that there's not the accountability, or there's not going to be people looking, and so they can get away with it. And that's the classic role of the media, is to actually follow that trail and kind of uncover that sort of stuff. Yet we've seen a lot of complicity between the media and the government, and generally aligning on narrative. And even the idea of narrative, it's like, I think, we throw it all around all the time now. It's like we've kind of inherited it from our overlords, but we talk about narrative, and it's, quite clearly there's narrative. Everyone's talking about narrative, even in business. It's like, what's the narrative of this product? But we've inherited that from the masters of propaganda. This is, you can study this stuff.
I find that stuff really interesting because the other thing you notice when you meet those sorts of people is it always strikes you that they're actually really normal people as well. Like you may have seen them or heard from them and think,
well, you've met Jacinda before, haven't you?
No, I haven't met her, spoken to her, but
Yeah.
but actually it is funny because I did, I went to a meeting room and she was there, And that is the exact thought that struck me. I was just sort of had a double take, and I was like, "Is she just a normal person? Everybody's just a normal person, and nobody." And we think these things about, like you did the way you described a Friday announcement just then. All the people involved in that announcement never would have thought along the lines of the language of how you described it, even though that's what it is. Like once you're in it, it's just not how you see it.
That's the
Um,
thing. Yeah. So you're in it. It's emergent. Like you're in that world, and you just start feeding off each other, and it becomes a thing.
mm,
And then the outcomes of that can actually be extreme once you step out of that bubble. But when you're
mm,
in it, you're in the stratosphere, and it normalizes it because everyone around you is doing that. But then you
mm,
compare that with the person on the street, the normal person, and it's like, yeah, actually quite different. And so our judgment of what is even possible, like the level of, how would you say, what the machinery of the state, there's, I think, a lack of awareness and sort of a lot of naivety about actually how powerful that machinery is once it starts moving. Like it's
mm,
like this container ship, it's very hard to turn it around once it starts going. Um, and that can steamroll the public. It can steamroll people. Um,
mm. Yeah, because that machine, it's not, there's no single person steering this or creating the overall view and narrative. But there's just a million people who are each a little part of that machine, and they're, doing what they think is right. And then yet the machine together is moving in this direction. That there's nobody's intention with this. Just, it's just this really, it's become as we've adapted to technology and moving forward in the future, that things become outdated.
oh,
And
yeah,
we have to look at change. But when I say we have to, like, it's actually one of my most hated turns of phrases. We need to, or
we
we
need to.
have to.
Who's we? Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I see it all the time and I say it and I catch myself and I'm like, who am I talking about here? Who is we and why? And why am I what sort of sense of entitlement do I have to think that everybody is we and I know best on what we should all do and not what we should do, but we have to. That's how it always goes. Oh, we have to do this and blah 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 blah. And it's like actually no. I love that saying that Tip often says, I'll probably get this one wrong as well. The smallest minority is the individual. Think, oh God, I don't know if I got that right. But I really like that saying because, that blows we have to out of the water. It's like you can't, like, who are you? Who am I to
who
say
am I?
that? You
Yeah,
know? Like, can't speak for everybody. I didn't go and ask every single person, do you think that this is what you want? And we all agree. And so this is what we have to do. Like, you suddenly get this realization that everybody's got their own little thoughts. Everybody's completely different and there is no we have to. And so again, coming back to tips messages again, you need to find the incentives. And if the incentives are right, then everybody does what everybody wants to do and the outcomes are good. And that's what it's all about. And that's why Bitcoin is such a beautiful thing because it provides amazing incentives that work at every level for every kind of human being.
yeah,
And that's just unbeatable. And there's just not many things like that, if any, in the world.
yeah. Well, that's, I think, also just today thinking about just the difference in quality of life or sort of future expectations for success for young people. And I include myself tentatively in the group, that sort of, generation that have really emerged post 2008, and sort of the difference in outcome that we can see compared to previous generations and what we expect and what we get. And, I was talking to someone sort of about the 80s and just the high flying, anything's possible, make it happen, Gen X
Mm,
type vibe, um, or even earlier, and just how lacking that is today. You see it globally. You see it in China. They got the
mm,
lying flat movement, tongue ping. Where people are just wanting to not do anything. And
mm,
you see it in a lot of places with younger Gen Z people, and it's like I kind of get it. It's like what have you got to look forward to? Um, it must be very, very difficult because, at that age, you shouldn't really be pessimistic about anything. Life is a gift and you're at the very beginning of it. And yet, people are just not wanting to do anything.
Yeah,
And
and I've been thinking about that sort of thing lately. I did watch a documentary the other day that was based in the 80s, and they're talking about, the positivity, and it was in America. So, it was things were very American in the 80s, and all of that kind of gung ho attitude and thing, and economically things started to go very well. But it was interesting when I was watching that because they talked about versus the 70s when they had experienced inflation, and then they sort of came out of it, and then it felt like a realm of positivity in the 80s. And so it started making me think about the cycles, because we talk about that feeling today, and like we have this tone of discussion of it's gone and it's not coming back. But actually, I started thinking, man, we just in a cycle, because I remember we were talking one time, and you were talking about, I think it was around the early 2000s, like a hustle culture, and so perhaps there was a cycle, an up cycle there, because maybe it was my age at the time, but I felt early 2000s that it was a very positive vibe. I remember the city was quite vibrant at that time, and it did feel like the world was full of possibilities. But then I often just file that away as well. That's how old I was at that time. It's something that comes with that
yeah,
age. But maybe there are cycles, and where that was an up cycle. The 80s were an up cycle, and now we're in a down cycle. Maybe
fourth
an up
turning,
cycle is coming. Yeah.
fourth turning. Yeah, I mean,
Is Bitcoin the trigger for the next up
yeah.
cycle?
Well, that's what I've been thinking about as well. Like, just how quickly a vibe can kind of, float, sort of transmit through a population, and that sort of zeitgeist or that sort of wave of euphoria. And I don't know, man, I could just feel things like even just the last couple of days with, everything happening in the Bitcoin world. I'm like, yeah, I could see this just zapping through the entire world, this kind of vibe. And suddenly people are like, yeah, this is it. And they just align. And, people don't realize, but humans are, verbal language is really nothing. It's this kind of subliminal communication that we have, is what, humans have had for our entire history. Language
Mm,
came much later, and it's like the ability for people to synchronize on an idea and to know what their interlocutor or their friends and family around them are trying to convey, that kind of sense of community. And you get that with things like sports. You get that with um, you know groups of people who are aligned on a goal, a very specific, clear goal, and they're
mm,
together and they just vibe and they get it done. And there's that camaraderie, all of that stuff. And that can just, I think that can just happen, and it just washes
mm,
through a population. And are we just waiting for that to just pop off somewhere, somehow?
mm. Well, I couldn't agree more. And I've had recent learnings around this through my job. Where I'm working, there was a restructure, and we organized into different teams and whatnot. And I'm in a leadership team where my manager, who is very focused on culture and setting a good vibe. And I agreed with him in principle, and just, decided to have a crack at it. Let's have a go at this, what he's talking about. But the results have been very surprising to me. And, the culture in the workplace a lot of the time, like my work, work from home, it's basically as much as you want, as you tell people. And so there's most people doing 2 days a week at home, some of them more. And there's very little people coming in every day. And this team of sort of 30, a brand new team, and we set some cultural ideas and worked on that first. And it's jaw dropping what has happened in just a few short months. Like it's gone from, like, there's a hot desking situation, there's less desks than there are people because not everybody's going to show up every day, etc. Now we've gone from there's always spare desks to you can't get a desk like in this area. Um, and there was nothing spoken about it, but you can see the culture is good and there's a vibe and people are enjoying it and they're choosing to show up every day. No one ever said anything. They just are. And And now now you're seeing the productivity come, like the work is going well. And he's changed my view. I'm like, geez, it works. Like it really does. And so that's that vibe. And that was literally just about overnight. And there's
How,
just a buzz about the people.
how did you activate that culture change? Was it just around bringing people back into the
Well,
office or?
no, we never spoke about it. This has been an unexpected outcome. There was never any spoke. He just spoke about the importance of people, and just working on making it a good place to work. And so it started from an attitude from the managers. There's him, myself, and two other managers managing this team, and so we just started bringing that, and seeing mistakes and errors as opportunities, not a time to bash somebody a bit about it, you know. So if a mistake was made, just have a happy attitude about it, help them through it, talk about what we're going to do now to not make the same mistake. And did turn I've seen a lot of mistakes in there turned into opportunities. And I've seen it's a fairly young team, and I've seen some young people who weren't feeling that confident, just coming out of their shells and just having more of a voice, feeling confident in themselves, and then starting to make decisions, like not being scared of making a decision. So you're creating a no fear culture, is the cliche, I guess.
Hmm.
So I mean, we did put proper things in place, like setting up career development pathway systems, like good ones to get them, not just top box ticking exercises, turning meetings into collaborative stand-ups rather than just whatever. Getting people, a lot of servant leadership, like um, you know, letting the experts decide how things should be done, and then supporting on and see how it goes, and then take learnings from it and update and tweak it. So there were some tangible measures like that, but it was really overall just the attitude change about how you're going to treat people and how you got the environment you're creating. And yeah, and then the rest is coming now. Like the work is becoming high quality, and it's on time, it's on budget, and you can hear the discussions and the collaboration. And then there's people who are on different projects and have nothing to do with somebody else, but there they are talking to them, telling them this time that they had a project like that and this is what happened, and maybe that can help you. And you just see that culture change, and so you're just getting
Yeah,
improvements across the board.
yeah.
Um,
It's
so
like a
yeah, so pulling that back to a larger scale, like yeah, I definitely think it can happen. I mean, it's hard to interpret stuff you see in the media, but some of the stuff you see about El Salvador make you think that there's a vibe going on over there now. Um, I mean, I don't know their political situation. I've been seeing things about the leader. I don't really know all of that kind of stuff. And I know these things can crash and burn, but there definitely appears to be a vibe. And people, with the reduction in crime and what they're doing over there. So yeah, hopefully we can see that at scale around the world, because there's not many countries. I remember it used to be fairly normal. You'd see a country really like progressing and becoming wealthier and opportunities and less a better economic situation and a vibe coming. And there were always countries on the up and countries on the down. It does feel like there's not many on the up
yeah,
any longer. So it's refreshing to see that one, and hopefully we see more and more.
the ascendancy. I think, yeah, certainly there's a relationship between the individuals and the larger organism, whether it's the company or the nation state, and the attitudes of the individuals are kind of they melt into the attitudes of the country, and vice
Mm.
versa. There's some effects there, which there must be some political science done on the how that emerges. I mean, it is still, I guess, a relatively new field, like no more than 100 years old, I would say. This sort of broadcast media, the ability to actually broadly influence a large number of people in such a way. I just don't think print media had that same impact as radio and television. And so it was really kicked off in that era, sort of 1920s,
Mm.
1930s. So we're sort of coming out to 100 years of that. Because yeah, even newspapers are quite interesting. There's a long history of independent newspapers and small local papers, and of course, I mean, they had to be local. There was, no way to get from one side of the country to the other. And so, there was always this localism, whereas, it's just not the same now. You've got local information, but it's also globally mediated through the internet. So looking at sort of the ability to align, I think there's always these pendulum swings. Maybe this is a move back from centralization back to decentralization. There's also this move towards localism and what's happening around you, kind of that search for community, getting out of the home and actually going back to the office to seek meaning in what you do and what you do every day. Because I think there's something deeply problematic about work from home. I mean, it makes sense. Maybe you got family, you got a day where you can actually do that, but actually making that your full-time thing, I don't. And like maybe it's a personality thing, but I certainly don't see that as pleasurable or valuable or productive in any sense to be sitting at home trying to do work. Give me
It's
my work.
occasionally convenient, but myself, I start to get a bit. I definitely feel better for having been in the office. Yeah, I do 2 days in a row at home or something. I do start to feel a bit not quite right. Like it's just not. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, there's something about the office. Yeah, and that vibe. It's hard to transmit that vibe through electronic medium.
And I think that circles back to what we're talking about, the importance of meetups. I mean, meetups is a funny one because it sounds very casual, right? But it's actually these associations of people, human contact, like coming together and actually talking about ideas. And this is the salon, this is the Royal Society. This is, the palaces and the courtrooms where this kind of discourse once happened. But now it's happening in, bars and cafes and restaurants that accept Bitcoin all over the world, and small groups of people are getting together and talking about real politics, as in from the polity, from the people, and they're talking about new ways of doing things, and they're expanding the kind of available options for what you could actually do. And that's a kind of civic engagement that we just haven't seen before. Like who would get together and talk about this kind of stuff, because it's all connected. The economy, monetary policy, the future of currency, and the direction of the nation state. Like these are big questions that small groups of people all over the world are having these conversations about in a way that I don't think they were before.
That's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that, because what other... Yeah, there's not... I mean, I'm sure there's always special interest groups. Somebody's really into something and they find a group of like-minded people, but these Bitcoin meetups and events around the world are a global phenomenon. They're popping up everywhere. And it's not just the odd group of geeks. It's everyone's everywhere is doing this, and people are becoming more enlightened about all these things, and linking that back to the vibe, like you say, you feel that at Bitcoin meetups. There is a huge vibe, and people get a buzz on and they leave. And the first few days after a meetup are just a hive of activity where everyone doesn't want to let that go. They want to be back there again because it was just awesome talking about all this stuff with people, interesting people, and they want to do it more, and they want to work with these people and create things. It's awesome.
Here's an idea. So I agree with that. Like, I wonder if, in a way, take language out of it. The spoken word, I hate it. That's what I do, but I hate the spoken word. I believe there is this connection people have. And if we can see this actually as a kind of healing mechanism for effectively what is a broken system, like I think deep down we all know there's some major issues that are facing the world right now, and they've really come to a head politically, economically, socially. What is even going on? And you just literally open the front page up of a news site and you think, man, honestly, if I just came here in a time machine and looked at this from 10 years ago, I would just be in disbelief at the insanity. But it's been like the slow boil, right, of the frog and whatever. That's clown world stuff. But maybe we see this as almost like a healing mechanism, where it's like these nodes, these individual actors amongst the population who are just, for whatever reason, wired differently. They've been exposed to different ideas, are coming together, and they're like the white blood cells. They're like coming together to bring this idea and this vibe, we call it, and we're kind of fermenting it or just kind of developing it into something. And it's like ideas come in and then things come out, whether it's a Bitcoin business or a book or a podcast or a meetup, further events. But it's like, I don't know, it's like the mycelium of the social structure of the world is healing from what has been a mechanical postmodern intervention that is not successful, and it's beginning to fail before our eyes.
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry.
that was a lot to take in, but I do get it. And there's definitely something there. And actually, what it got me thinking while you were saying that was, I've had a bit of a change of mindset in the Bitcoin world. And, when I first kind of felt like I was really starting to understand the enormity of Bitcoin, I had this really early, strong drive to want to convince everybody about this, tell everybody about this. Come on, like start educating, learn, the classic orange pilling. And I started feeling like that was the mission, and I was really trying to get out there and do that. But now I think I've changed tack without realizing it, and realized that actually everything I'm doing in Bitcoin, I'm actually now doing for Bitcoiners that are already Bitcoiners. And I'm starting to feel like I don't need to orange pill people. I mean, it speaks for itself. And then we talk about this vibe. I mean, it's infectious. Somebody, I went to, gosh, I can't remember his real name, Why Dancer online, started a Bitcoin meetup in Wellington, and I went to it. And there was somebody there who wasn't yet that knowledgeable on Bitcoin. He'd come in curiosity, but you could see he felt the vibe. And then he started asking us some questions, and we were talking about it, and he was just super into it. And he wanted to come back, and he wanted to, he wanted to know more, and he wants to get in touch with you. And he's felt the vibe. He's realized this is awesome, and he's reconnecting with like what you talk about. And nobody contacted him to Orange Bear. He showed up of his own volition, and now here he is. And so now I just feel like we're doing things in Bitcoin for Bitcoiners, because that group is just going to grow organically and by itself, and people are going to see that. And so if you just do things for Bitcoiners, that's where it's at now.
Well, I got like, just coming back to this like organism kind of idea, like you think about all of the different parts, the moving parts of it, because there's obviously mining and hardware and the real equipment. There's ideas and kind of discourse. There's people actually coding and doing non-tangible stuff like that. There's all of these different kinds of pieces, and it's like it's an ecosystem, and just
it's massive. And I remember talking about this a while ago. I was plugging this quite hard for a while, probably a year ago or something, about Bitcoin is for everybody. Like, it's not actually, there's Bitcoin culture is a silly term.
Yeah,
it's just, and it's like saying internet culture. It's just silliness. Like, the internet is everything. Like, everything is on the internet. In the early 90s, you could say that and talk about it that way when it was so small. But it's for everybody, and they can do what they want. And yet there's so many things. Bitcoin literally will touch everything. It is green fields for ideas. I listened to an episode of the 2-Bit Idiots podcast, the Australian guy and a Scottish guy, but and they had a guy on from Essex, and he was really interesting, and he sort of had that sentiment. He was like, there's tons of people out there who say they want a job in Bitcoin, but he's like, forget it. He's like, just think of an idea, do something. What is it that interests you, and find its connection to Bitcoin, because you'll find it. And do that if you're into Bitcoin and you want to get into it this way. And he mentioned how he kind of stopped listening to podcasts and things. Like, he decided, maybe it's not the right medium to say that. What other medium can you say something? But no offense, but he was claiming that the influencer and podcasting side of Bitcoin was quite saturated. Mm-hmm. And he's like, so there's tons of people getting into this, but actually think of an idea. Like, what is your idea, and do it, because it's just an open world for anything you want to do. It's so new. There's nothing. There's so much you could do. Just think of something and try it.
Well, that
Um,
yeah, that in
it's
itself
cool.
is that's very optimistic in itself, right? That kind of open open field, right? And I'm just thinking like, just coming back to the sort of fiat Bitcoin duality, this idea of like healing, which sounds very woo woo, but like it kind of is like, we've got this kind
Mm,
of existing physical structure of the world around us, the conceptual structure of our attitudes, and then the abstractions of money and power and politics, which are not really tangible, but they have an effect on the tangible. And we're seeing the physical structures are the same things, but the concepts and the abstractions are changing. They're sort of washing through, and that's kind of the vibe I talk about. It's like, yeah, you go to a party, that you go to the place where a party was the night after, or you go to um, a park in winter when it's all cold and empty and freezing versus springtime. There's like this kind of change that time, this kind of fourth dimension brings through, as you look at something, and it's like, well, maybe are we experiencing this just sort of period of change in this brief, very interesting period in time where we've got one system declining and another emerging,
mm,
and that, I mean, that's quite a lot to kind of take on, and I think that's where a lot of people end up getting to is like, yeah, this is very big, and that's kind of like this ecosystem, like the desert, the kind of the cut forest is being reclaimed again by this kind of growth, and
mm,
it's like, again, these sort of these cells, these kind of nodes are forming of people talking about ideas and building relationships and connections. And I mean, we've got some clear examples here in this small town, but yeah, of being able to connect with yourself and many others. And then there's people who've got, from that, I've been able to build out other connections. And for example, with the mining stuff and some of the other stuff that we're experimenting with, it's like actually friends of a friend, connection of a connection, and then it's like we're rebuilding these networks and kind of rewiring
mm.
the abstractions and the conceptual the relationships between things, even though we are still in the same buildings, it's the same
Mhm.
city. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really fun time to be in it.
It's an exciting time to be alive, I tell you.
It is, and going right back to the beginning of the conversation, you're talking about a lot of nihilism and everything about. I have to bite my tongue when talking to people a lot of the time now because you see someone you've been caught up with for a while, and they ask you what you've been doing, and you ask what they've been doing, and so many times I feel like I'm inside becoming some kind of motivational speaker, but I'm trying to keep a lid on it. But I just want to say to people, you need to find your thing. Like, it's not, you're not going to be happy like this. But it's actually kind of pompous and arrogant because, I feel like I found my thing. And so if I went back 5 years, I was just like, had the same attitude as the person I'm talking to. And if somebody said to me, you need to find your thing, it would have just sounded so cheesy and silly, and I just would have dismissed it. Um, and yet I just see it in everybody. I'm just like, man,
Well, what
go
about this?
on, what gets you going? Do it.
What about this then? Like, what if through this kind of Bitcoin transformation that's taking place, obviously there's everyone's moving at their own speed and everyone has their own, situation in their life. But actually focusing on the what we can do, which is just building these systems and this kind of new layer of growth over this like burnt desert that's kind of the fiat world, right? And it's like this new mycelium, this new growth of this kind of sprouting springtime, thing is emerging from the thaw. And if we focus on that, it's like when the people are ready, they'll come and partake in
Well,
the
yeah,
garden. But
yeah.
like, you know what I mean? Like when the vibe hits and it's here, and everyone's like, yeah, this is the place to be right now, planet Earth,
Mm.
like that. And that sounds very culty. I'm sorry, but like when that happens, and there's just, I don't know, maybe it's the election cycle or whatever it is that kind of kicks off this kind of you know next phase. I don't know what it will be, but there'll be some kind of trigger point for this, and we'll look back and be like, yeah, that was the moment it all popped off, and sort of focusing on having that place ready.
Yeah. It's interesting because one thing I also think a lot about is, well, I always am comparing Bitcoin with the internet technologically. And I feel like they're fairly closely aligned. And we can always look to the internet to try and help us see what might be coming. And, if I had a deep understanding of the internet early, I would have thought or spoke of it in similar terms. But now when I look, but I didn't, but if I had, but now when I look back over that, there isn't, I wouldn't be able to tell you a date or a year or a marker like that for the internet adoption. And, we talk about the fiat world and the Bitcoin world, the internet and the pre-internet world, they coexisted and it slowly came in over. And, we don't now look back at the pre-internet world as some kind of problem. It was just a technological move and we found something amazing. And so I do think, with the benefit of hindsight, we're not going to look back and say the fiat world was problematic. It was actually, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that it was amazingly awesome, like finding, we had a scarce thing like gold, and then we found a way to make it more transmissible and allowed the world to progress and advance. I feel like it's just run its course, just like anything else. And so, in the similar way that people just really rag on religion these days, because most of society has moved past that sort of organization and of its influence on society. And I get really angry when people really are quite derogatory towards religion, because I feel like it's just such a huge and important and actually positive part of our history. People look at me like I got two heads if I say that. But, I don't want to fall into the same thinking with fiat currency, because it's been an important step. We wouldn't get to Bitcoin without going through that. And a lot of hugely awesome advancements happened in that. I just feel like the technology, we've gone beyond that technology, and it's decaying. And now we've found the next level.
I wonder if we're going to actually look back on this period of stagnant kind of old buildings, old ways of thinking, old institutions, and actually have a sense of nostalgia for these days one day in the future. And we, sort of like if I try and remember back to the 90s, and it's like, because you get certain things and kind of imagery that sort of comes through, maybe someone's driving like an old car and it's like, well, that was pre whatever, and it sort of feels anachronistic, out of place and out of time. And I wonder if one day we'll be like, oh, I found this, check this out, it's some old money, or yeah, this is what we used to use. And oh man, and we have this like trip down memory lane. Yet, the next generation will be like, man, what is that? And maybe maybe there's even a bit of nostalgia for it that is for people who were never even there. And you get stuff like coin collecting, and this whole thing becomes like a huge hobby, but like vinyl is like really popular now. I've got a vinyl player behind me, like, like I just wonder like what sort of subcultures could emerge around that as well.
Oh, I definitely think all of those things will happen. I mean, I've not thought about this before.
Sorry, I was
but when you're just, but when you say that, 100%, when there's no coins and no notes in the world, there'll be people out there collecting them, and they'll be like aiming to get a note from every country that ever had a note, or
a subreddit. Definitely. There'll be like a subreddit for whatever, the last money,
yeah,
and the collectibles.
And
then that becomes store value.
But yeah, definitely. And there'll be nostalgia. It'll feel nostalgic, and you'll have fond memories. I mean, I get nostalgia about newspapers. I loved reading the newspaper my dad always got the Dominion and the Evening Post every day. I delivered the Evening Post as a kid for like 5 years. It was my first job. I loved the newspaper. I grew up with the newspaper. I read everything, especially in sport when I was a kid. I was all over it and did the crosswords. And then when I got a little bit older and I was about 20, I bought the newspaper every day, read it every morning. It was almost always my thing. And I'm not quite sure at the point where that stopped, but I definitely get nostalgic about it. There's something, I really liked that. It was part of my routine. It was where I got my information. I just loved it.
Did you get paid in the little brown envelopes when you were delivering?
Yeah, news? Man.
Yeah. I did the Saturday morning paper run as well, and early start,
Oh yeah,
frosty
well, no, I was
mornings.
after school,
Oh, okay.
the evening post.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
that was a great job as a kid. I started when I was 10. I was quite young. The others were
mm,
all 11, 12 when they started.
yeah,
$17.50 a week. My
yeah,
mates were jealous. That was a huge amount of money
yeah,
in 1991 or whenever I started doing that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good
That's
times.
that's amazing, man. Well, that's well, I think we've explored some areas. I think I do enjoy our chats. Like we explore different areas, and that's kind of where this all came from, right? It's like I don't know, just having the discussion and the
Mm.
possibilities, laying them out, just just kind of talking through them, uh, laying out a map, a potential map of what could happen, and yeah, just throwing around ideas.
Well,
That's what I.
it's good going so wide ranging because, like we just talked about, Bitcoin touches everything. There's some pretty full on educated Bitcoiners out there who I don't even think understands how wide ranging this thing is, how big. I mean, it is. God, that sounds cheesy, but it is the transformation. I'm not even going to say it because that's
The
just too
transformation
cheesy.
of value.
And it
Oh,
really, it really is. And one day, give it 20 years away. I can't put a time scale on it, but people look back and say, we just had no idea how big this thing was. Once
so,
upon a time's internet, it's just,
well,
40-year-old virgins chatting with each other at message boards,
yeah.
and we laughed. And now look.
Well, actually, on that note as well, like I mean, I was been playing around setting up like a network storage device, just for all my photography and video for my projects. And I mean, I come from a generation where it was like, man, I couldn't even imagine that it would be possible to edit video and my huge raw files on a network device, in a different place. And yeah,
Mm,
I've actually been playing around with it, and it's like totally doable. And I came in with these kind of technical preconceptions of like what's even possible, because I grew up with dial up and slow internet. And I don't know, mentally, I didn't even consider it as a possibility that I could have a hard drive on my computer. It's actually a network device that's way over here somewhere. And that is totally possible now. And it's like, it's just accepted. And I think younger people they don't even know that there was a day when you couldn't have that. We had, not even dial up, but just even slower ADSL internet. You couldn't do stuff
mm,
like that. And so I think also just staying kind of young in mind around like just looking at the new tech that's coming out and just being like, yeah, we're not going to go back to it being like worse than that. Like
mm,
I even find it because I haven't owned a car in probably about 10 years, but all the cars I ever had were from the 90s.
mm.
And anytime I jump in a car now, and I'm like, man, what is this? This spaceship.
Yeah,
Like there's all these dials and screens
yeah,
and stuff. And I'm like,
yeah,
man, I remember, I don't know about you, but it's like all of the cars I ever had were like, a couple of dials and the steering wheel and the stick, like
yeah, yeah.
that was it. And I don't know, just because it was like the anachronistic thing again, where the cars, even in the like 2000s or whatever, the 2010s, the cars were all from the 90s, and they
Mm,
had just sort of transported through time. And so you were still using them. And so you don't realize like the tech has moved and the
massively.
generations have gone on, and we're never going back to the old school way.
Mm, yeah.
Uh,
That cracks me up with the kids because the kids will see a car from the 90s or something. And they'll be like, oh, my dad used to have that car. And they were like, man, it's such a small car. And it's like it's like a family sedan from the 90s.
yeah.
And they're like, what? It's so tiny. And I'm like, yeah, it is.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, man, that was good. I appreciate you taking the time to catch up. And yeah, I'm just really blown away and grateful that all of the work you and the Dans and that have done with Bitkiwi, and look forward to the next one and catching up with everyone. And yeah.
Oh, it's all good, man. Thanks for the support and everyone who comes along. It's what's making it. It's fantastic. Love
Yeah.
it.
Sweet. Thank you. So that's Bitkiwi 6, Wellington, July 22nd
Yep.
at
2
the
p.m.
at the Fork and Brewer
That's
in
right.
Wellington.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll throw the details in the show notes. Thank you, Paul.
Cheers, Cody.
All right.
Thanks.